Welcome to Beat Diabetes. We're going to continue in our look at the book called Good Energy. Kind of a strange name. It's written by Dr. Casey Means. She is an MD, and she is the latest rage. I mean, people are talking about her all over the place, and she's being invited for interviews on television, on podcasts. The low-carbers seem to like her quite a bit. The vegans even seem to like her quite a bit. Almost everybody thinks she's wonderful. I'm not quite so sure. Not talking about her personally. I'm sure she's a fine lady, but I'm talking about the book and some of her attitudes. So we're going to get into them. I would say if I had to sum up Casey Means' basic approach to good health and nutrition, she's just like the more natural, the better. And most of us would say, yeah, that makes sense. We want to eat natural foods and we don't want to eat foods that are highly processed and unnatural and strange. So a lot of people could say, well, what's wrong with that? And the answer is there's not really much wrong with that, but there are some things that are problematic for diabetics. Let me just put it that way. So let's get into them. I've got a number of quotes I want to share, so we're going to try to move along quickly. But actually, the first one, I just want to remind you of something I shared a couple of weeks ago about Casey. I saw her doing an interview where she told about a friend of hers who had been eating oatmeal for years and years and years as his normal breakfast. That's what he ate every breakfast, oatmeal. And then she had encouraged him to wear a CGM. He started wearing the CGM. He realized his blood sugar was jumping up 100 points, milligrams per deciliter, after that oatmeal breakfast. And then he went to eggs and avocados and it barely moved, and he learned a lesson. And she shared that story in her interview. So when you hear a story like that, you say, yeah, she's one of us. She understands that carbs drive blood sugar. And so you would think, okay, she's one of our group. But there's other things she says that makes you think, well, I don't think she's quite one of us. So let me just share some of the good and some of the not so good. We'll start with the positive stuff. She makes the statement in her book, fasting insulin is the most valuable lab test you can get. And I'm sure if Benjamin Bickman was reading this, he'd be jumping up and down for joy, saying, yeah, you go, girl. Fasting insulin, that is what you need to find out. I agree. Fasting insulin can tell you a lot, especially important for people that do not consider themselves diabetic. They've never been diagnosed as diabetic, and they wonder, am I getting anywhere close to being diabetic? Well, one thing, of course, is to get an A1C, but another way is to have your fasting insulin tested. So almost everybody agrees fasting insulin is an important test. Okay, here is another one of her quotes that seems encouraging and goes right along with the low-carb idea and message. She says, when we consume more sugar and carbohydrates than our liver, mitochondria can handle, the excess glucose is converted to triglycerides. And what she's saying is you don't want that. You don't want high triglycerides, which almost everybody agrees with. The interesting thing is that when you eat a lot of sugar and carbs of any kind, your triglycerides go up almost every time. And when you cut the carbs, they almost always go down. I mean, like 99% of the time, they will go down drastically. So if you say triglycerides are a bad thing to have, high triglycerides, then what you're saying is you probably ought to cut your carbs. So when she says that, yeah, I agree. And then she says, in terms of what raises triglyceride levels, the simple message is high triglycerides are almost certainly a warning sign that you're eating too much sugar. I agree. Refined carbs and or alcohol, and probably not engaging in enough physical activity. The little problem I have with that statement is she mentions refined carbs. And when you keep hammering on refined carbs, which she does a lot, that plus ultra-processed foods, what you are not so subtly implying is that if you can just get rid of the refined carbs, the rest of the carbs are fine for you. So I don't want to eat white rice, but brown rice would be okay. I don't want to eat macaroni and cheese, but a big baked potato is fine because it's natural. It's a whole food. So when you hammer home the idea of refined carbs too much, you give people the idea that carbs themselves are not a problem, just reduce the refined carbs. Here's another thing she says, in my case, my triglyceride levels on 2 different diets, one a high-carb diet, low-fat, vegan, and the other a more omnivorous, higher-fat, moderately low-carb diet, were both 47 milligrams per deciliter. She says neither diet overwhelmed my cells too much, with too much energy to process because both focused on unprocessed whole foods. Again, the idea is if you can just do away with the processing, you're in good shape. And she says, well, hey, look at me. I had a low triglycerides eating a vegan diet, and then I went to an omnivorous diet with some meat and lesser carb. She doesn't say low carb, and I doubt very much if it was really low carb by our standards. But she says, same thing. I had low triglycerides. Well, a couple of things there. Number one, you got to keep in mind, Casey Means is a young lady. She may not think of herself as a young lady. She's a medical doctor, been through med school, been around for a while. But you look at a picture of her, and she is not old. She's not like me. And plus, she's slim. Young people who are slim, or younger people in their 30s, let's say, who are slim, can pretty much get away with almost anything and keep their numbers pretty good. So the fact that she had low triglycerides, even eating a vegan, higher carb diet, is not shocking to me. But you take her, if we could move time along, and you bring her to the point where she's 65 and about 40 pounds overweight, she may have trouble eating a vegan diet and keeping her triglycerides low. Okay, here's another positive statement. She says, positive in my mind, I like it. She's talking about post-meal glucose testing. She says, immense learning comes from understanding how different foods, meals, and ingredient combinations affect your blood sugar in the 1 or 2 hours after you eat. We want to minimize spikes because they are associated with worse health outcomes. Well, what can I say but amen, Sister Casey? I mean, exactly. Post-meal, that's what I've been preaching and beating like a drum for years and years and years. Got to control those spikes. I don't even say really low-carb diet, although it ends up being one, but what I like to say is a low-spike diet. But the reality is, if you want a low-spike diet, you'd better deal with getting a low-carb diet. They go hand in hand. You can't find one without the other. But here she emphasizes that you don't want big spikes. Amen, amen, amen. So throughout the book, there's a lot of good things. And as I said last week, if you went from a sad diet, just a standard American diet, eating junk, eating as much as you like, whenever you like, whatever you like, and you absorbed this book and just took in everything she said, you would be bound to improve significantly. And I'm sure people are improving, and I'm sure that's part of why people are excited about the book, is that it works to a degree. Again, for an older person who's overweight and really struggling with a high A1C, this wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't be near enough. But for younger people who are just kind of dabbling with getting close to pre-diabetes or maybe diabetes, and they're not much overweight, this could really help you a great deal. Okay, let's get to some of the negative things. In my mind, again, some people wouldn't call them negatives at all, and she certainly wouldn't. She wrote the book. But in my mind, I'm not so impressed. Here's one statement where she talks about the solution to the crisis of metabolic syndrome. She doesn't use the term metabolic syndrome too much. She often likes to call it bad energy, which is kind of a new agey type of term. But anyway, she says this: the solution to this crisis is very simple. Promote unprocessed whole foods and discourage ultra-processed industrial foods. RFK Jr. is the same way. He's saying that all over the place these days. Just promote whole foods, natural foods, healthy foods, foods with a lot of vitamins and minerals in them, and stay away from these industrial foods, processed foods, refined foods, etc. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, in itself, it's not so bad. It's just not enough. And the reality is, when she says go for the whole foods, the natural foods, what she's really going back to is the standard ADA diet. The American Diabetes Association has been saying for years that what a diabetic must do is switch from white potatoes to sweet potatoes, switch from white rice to brown rice, switch from white bread to whole wheat bread, or better yet, Ezekiel's bread, and everything will be perfect. And the problem with that kind of advice is it just flat doesn't work for serious diabetics. Again, it may help you if you're not that far into diabetes. But if you're a serious diabetic, it is not going to do the job for you. And the ADA has a terrible track record. Whereas doctors who put people on a low-carb diet and they just say, cut the carbs, period. Don't worry about whether they're white or brown. Just don't eat many carbs. And keep those carbs low. They're the ones that see the success, the tremendous success, and that includes this particular channel. And all I've said for the last 7 years or so is cut those carbs. Seriously, I've never recommended doing away with them. So this is a big problem in my mind. If you focus heavy on, you got to watch those refined carbs, you got to watch those processed carbs, then you are giving a free pass to people saying, yeah, it's okay, eat that sweet potato, eat that baked potato, eat that brown rice, eat that quinoa, eat that Ezekiel bread, no problemo. Just avoid the processed, super processed, highly processed, ultra processed carbs. Not good enough for the 65-year-old diabetic who's about 60, 80 pounds overweight, and he's desperately or she's desperately trying to fix themselves, just saying, I'm going to eat whole foods. I'm going to eat quinoa from now on instead of rice. I'm going to eat brown bread instead of white. Well, good luck with that, because that is not going to be enough. It's kind of like throwing teaspoons of water at a forest fire. Yeah, you appear to be doing some good, but you really aren't doing much good. All right, let me give you a few thoughts I had. We've mentioned them, but let me just hit them again. First of all, if you go from the standard American diet or standard African diet, standard British diet, and you go to her plan of eating more healthy, processed, natural foods, yeah, you will almost certainly improve if that's where you're coming from. Second point, again, but we've said it, but let me just repeat it. She's really not saying much different than the ADA has been saying for years and years and years. Eat healthy, natural foods and avoid the unnatural foods. So don't eat a Twinkie, don't eat a donut, but enjoy your brown rice and enjoy your sweet potatoes. Not enough, my friend. You know, she's big into nutrition, and a lot of people are. But the reality is this: if you're being poisoned, the biggest goal of your life, if somebody's poisoning you every day, they're dropping some low-grade poison into your drink, and you're being poisoned and slowly losing it, the answer to your problem is not to take more vitamin C or eat more Ezekiel bread. The answer is stop that poisoning. Get that person out of your house, whoever's poisoning you, and stop taking it. And we are being poisoned, not by all kinds of processed foods necessarily. We're being poisoned by eating enormous loads of sugar and carbohydrates of all kind, refined and unrefined, processed, ultra-processed, and no processed. If it's a carb, you got to be careful with it. You got to cool it on those carbs, whatever they are. You know, I can pick a mango off of a mango tree, if there were any around here, which I don't think there are, and start eating it, and I can be so proud of myself saying I'm eating a healthy, unprocessed, unrefined mango. And yet my blood sugar could jump 125 points in a matter of 45 minutes. Because my body doesn't care whether it's processed or unprocessed. What it cares about is how many carbs and sugars am I ingesting. How do I know that? You say, Dennis, you're not even a doctor. You're not even a nutritionist. How in the world do you know that? Well, I do listen to doctors and nutritionists, but primarily I've been testing my blood sugar ever since diabetes first started to come at me back in 2001. In 2002, I think I actually started the testing. And I quickly found it out. You know, fruits that were supposed to be good for me. I remember the first time I realized a banana is loaded with sugar. I tested my blood sugar after what I thought was a healthy meal, which included a banana. And my blood sugar jumped way too high. And I thought, what's going on here? I think I Googled banana in those days. And I found out a banana had about as much sugar as a candy bar. And I've done a test on beet diabetes and showed that a banana will raise your blood sugar as much or more than a candy bar will. So to only focus on refined carbohydrates, processed carbohydrates, and forget about the fact that carbs in general are doing you in, they're doing a number, they're poisoning you. Not that it's evil to eat carbs. Eat the low carbs, the low carb veggies. And if you're going to have some bread, make it a low carb bread out of some almond flour and maybe some coconut flour and throw in some psyllium husk or whatever. Don't eat normal bread. You can't handle it. You can't stand it. Because ultimately, it's not me or Casey or some guru on the internet that tells you how to eat. They're not going to have to pay the price for you driving your blood sugar so high meal after meal after meal, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. They're not going to pay the price for how you eat. You, my friend, are going to pay the price or enjoy the benefit if you have enough wisdom to stop poisoning yourself with too many carbs and too much sugar and just cut the sugar out altogether and lower the carbs down and watch your blood sugar come back to the normal or close to normal range. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our uploads page is in the description.